Welcome to the second part of painting the Reaver Titan from Adeptus Titanicus. I'm Jason, the creator of the Tabletop Battlefield. In this episode, we're going to focus on the top armor plating, but the techniques used here do apply to the leg armor as well. Up to this point, I've primed the miniature in Chaos Black using Games Workshop's primer, as well as my 3D printed custom priming tool. And then in the previous video, we painted some of the various mechanical parts, like the leg actuators and things along those lines. To get started with the Carapace, what I want to actually do is work on some of the detail first. With the various models from Adeptus Titanicus, the edges as well as some of the insignias here, they're actually raised. And it's kind of easier to paint those first instead before we try to paint the base color of the armor, because it's actually kind of difficult to accidentally get the base color of the armor on those pieces. But it's fairly easy to accidentally get paint from those parts on the base coating of the armor. First up, I'm going to be using Rhinox Hide from Games Workshop Citadel line of paints. Going to be thinning this down a little bit and covering all the detail areas with this brown color. For this step, I'm using an Artificer Layer extra small brush. With this layer, the Rhinox Hide doesn't have to be perfect because we're going to be painting over any of your mistakes with the base armor color. So the base coat of the detailed parts are done. Now I'm going to apply a little bit of brown highlights to this. You just need to use some sort of lighter brown color than Rhinox Hide. I've got Leather Brown from the Army Painters War Painter series sitting around right here. But like I said, the exact color isn't important. You just want a little bit of a lighter brown color. Now you don't have to recover all the areas again. You're just kind of giving a little bit of variety to this brown color, and then eventually it's going to serve as a base for a gold color. So coverage is not super important. You just want a little bit of variety of color. As with the first layer, being super neat and clean is not really that important right at the moment. Let's leave the details alone for a little while now. The next step would be to paint up some gold color, but I'm going to do that after I paint up the base color of the armor panels. The first color in this case is going to be a base of Cantor Blue from Games Workshop Citadel line of paints. And this is a base paint, so I'm going to want to use several layers of thinned down paint. And my goal is probably to use 2, maybe 3 layers and just cover all the armor panels, at least all the non-detailed areas, with this blue color. Now if you do accidentally screw up and get a little bit of this blue color on the detail, don't worry about that. We can fix that later. If you find the paint is going on a little bit too thick, just dab your brush in a little bit of water and keep painting. And that'll help smooth out any visible brush strokes. If you have any colors from previous layer, like this weird blotch of gray that I must have accidentally put here, that's why you're going to add multiple layers of the thinned down paint. Those multiple layers will cover up those mistakes from earlier in the painting process. Whoops, there's those mistakes I was talking about. Don't worry about it, we'll fix it later. So the first layer is done. Once it is fully dried, I'm going to start applying a second layer to this miniature. And probably even a third layer, because it's all about getting complete coverage and also hiding your brush strokes. So let's go ahead and work on layers 2 and 3, which are going to be more thinned down Cantor Blue paint. So once you've got 2 layers done and you're moving on maybe 3 or more layers, what you're looking at this point is not doing complete coverage over the miniature. You're kind of looking for the areas where there's not uniform coverage and just working on those particular pieces of the armor. So for example here, this corner of this armor plate is a little bit darker than it should be because it's not fully covered with the paint. So my third layer is kind of focusing mostly just on this half of the armor plate and probably not so much up here in the front. So I'm generally happy with this particular layer of paint. Now what I like to do with these Titans, like what I did with my Warhound Scout Titan, is I get a little bit of a fade of color from the front to the back, where the front has a nice brighter blue color and the back has this darker Cantor Blue base. So for the brighter blue color, I'm going to be using Altdorf Guard Blue. This is a layer paint from Games Workshop Citadel paint line. And I'm going to be applying multiple thin layers once again, with each layer taking up a little bit less area than the previous one. So for the main Carapace, I'm going to start bright in the front, dark in the back. For the side armor pieces here on the shoulders, I'm going to start bright on the outside, dark on the inside. And for this process, watered down paint is honestly better than thicker paint. You can always add more thinned down layers if needed. The first layer, the brighter color, is done. You may not see a huge transition areas. That's all right. I'm going to apply my second, third, maybe even fourth layers of this really thinned down paint. If you're not liking the transition between the dark colors and the light color, like right here for example, don't worry about that right at the moment. We'll fix that later on. Just go ahead and, like I said, keep applying more layers, but with each subsequent layer, cover a little bit less area of the miniature. And also be sure to wait for the previous layer to fully dry before you apply the next layer. Applying more watered down paint to non-dried watered down paint is going to just basically move more paint around, not actually increase the saturation of the color very much. Layer 2, making progress. Let's move on to layer 3, and maybe I'll probably do 4 layers by the time this is all said and done with. So the various layers of the transition are done, but you can definitely see some very well-defined transition lines, especially on the shoulder pads. So now it's time to fix that kind of a mess. And what we're going to do is start creating a mixture between the Cantor Blue base color as well as the Altdorf Guard brighter color. We'll mix those together in different amounts and then water them down and start covering up the transition lines. So for the first step here, where we have Cantor Blue right here, I'm just going to work with some watered down Cantor Blue by itself and try to hide this rough transition line right there. And this is a really watered down paint, more so than you normally would do with a base paint from Games Workshop's line of paints. And while that is wet, take a little bit of the watered down Altdorf Guard Blue and we'll mix that kind of back in to where the transition area should be. You'll probably never completely get rid of the transition lines, but you can make them a little bit harder to notice. Let's do the same thing over here for this shoulder pad. And you can then start mixing together the Altdorf Guard Blue with the Cantor Blue and kind of work your way down the transitions. It's a bit of a just fiddly nature like this until you get something that you're generally happy with. And if you do try to break up the transition lines a little bit to where they're not nice smooth lines, kind of move your brush up and down around them and just mess them up a little bit, that will make it a little bit harder for your eye to pick those transition areas out. So I'm just going to go ahead and experiment a little bit more and just try to get it looking a little bit better. But at some point you do just kind of say, well, that's good enough and I'm happy with it. Time to move back to the details. So let's go back to the various kind of what are going to be gold details on the armor. And this time we're going to actually apply some gold to them. You don't have to apply gold color all over them, but you do want to make sure you at least cover up your oopsies. So right down here we got a little bit of blue paint on it. Make sure that gets covered up with gold and areas like that. For this particular step, I've got some greedy gold from the Army Painter War Paint series, but more or less any gold color is going to work fine. And by leaving some of the colors showing through beneath, it does give the illusion this is an ancient war machine that's kind of been around for a long time and the paint is wearing down. If you do make any mistakes, just go back with the blue paint and fix it up. So the first layer of gold is down. I'm liking how it looks. Let's add a little bit of variation to this. So I'm going to be taking some Stormhost Silver. This is a very bright metallic color from Games Workshop Citadel line of paints. I'm going to mix that into my gold to get a little bit of a brighter gold, and then applying that to some of the edges and some of the highlights to get a little bit of edge highlighting-ish effect to some of the various parts of the gold color. Next thing I'm going to do to the gold is I'm going to take actually the Stormhost Silver very carefully and apply a little dot of it to the tops of all the little rivets along the armor panel. One more layer of the gold. I'm going to be using the Seraphim Sepia, and this is going to be a wash that I'm going to apply to most of the gold color to kind of tone it down a little bit more and kind of sell that whole worn, battle damaged look to it. This is a dark brown wash from Games Workshop's Citadel line of paints. In particular, I'm also going to focus a lot on the recessed areas and the areas where there's obviously should be a little bit of a shadow being generated because there's overlapping pieces or things like that. We're getting close to having this miniature done. There's only a few more things we have to address. On the back here we've got these little, I don't know, we'll call them cooling widgets. I need to paint these up. So first step is going to be some Dawnstone Gray, which is a light gray color from Games Workshop Citadel line of paints. Our cooling widgets have a base gray color to them. Now it's time to apply a silver color. For this, I'm going to be using Lead Belcher from Games Workshop's Citadel line of paints. We're getting close to being very done here. I think I've got 2 more steps that I need to do. Now for those of you who watched the assembly video of this particular miniature, you know I had a problem of dropping pieces and losing them on the floor. In particular, one of these little cooling widgets fell off. I think I don't know what I did with it. I probably snapped it with the clippers and went flying. So my solution was to model the back of the Titan here as if it got blasted by some massive weapon. You can see there's a crater in there. So I need to make this look a little bit more like battle damage, but that's a very easy thing to do. You just need to use either a black or dark gray or something like that to give it a look that the areas around this blast have been charred. For this particular miniature, I'm working with Abaddon Black from Games Workshop's Citadel line of paints. It's got a little bit on my brush here, and I'm just going to very lightly paint it around this blast area. Then you can brush the paint off, and then kind of go back and spread around some of the paint that hasn't fully dried yet to get a little bit more of like a spread out, charred look to it. The last thing is to add some dirt and grime to this miniature. I'm going to be using some Known Oil Gloss from Games Workshop's Citadel line of paints. This is a black wash, but it does kind of shine a little bit, so it works very well for metallic surfaces. The important part here is to only use a little bit at a time and build it up, and I'm going to be putting this stuff in the corner of the armor panels as well as around some of the raised detail sections. So how I like to use it, I take some of it out of the pot, I put it on the little lip of the cap up here, I wipe my brush off, and then I dip my brush again in the lip of the cap, and then I run it on the side to really remove large amounts of the wash. I only have a very small amount of it on a brush, and that way I can build it up just a little bit at a time. It's very easy to overdo this particular step. If you don't think you have enough wash on your brush, go ahead and just do the same process and add more. It's one of those things where you can always add more wash, you can't really take it away. If you do find you put a little bit too much on, just spread it around, and that will reduce the effect of the wash. The other place you want to put it is going to be on and around these little cooling widgets that'll help bring out some of the detail by adding contrast. Put a little bit in these recessed areas also along the blue armor. So these little box things in the back, and then these areas that look kind of like cooling vents here in the back of the blue armor sections. And don't forget, like I almost just did, there's these little armor panel separations right here in the back that could use a little bit of wash in them to bring them out a bit more. With that, I'm going to call this particular process of painting the Reaver Titan complete. I'm quite happy with how the Carapace looks in terms of the blue shades and the gold details and all that fun stuff. So once again, my name is Jason. I am the creator of the Tabletop Battlefield. Go ahead and hit subscribe here on this YouTube channel to not only find the rest of the video series as they're released for this particular miniature, but also for some of my other projects dealing with robotics, other miniatures, 3D printing, and some new fun stuff coming this summer. So thank you guys all for watching, and have a great week.